Would there be someone who would be able to loan me a timer? Things have certainly changed in the last 2 years. It's all very proper now. Lovely, thank you. All right, so just really quickly, I have to start my time. Really quickly, my background is in molecular genetics with a focus on the diagnostics in neurogenetics, and my background is in medicine. So my speech will be called, "You are all from primordial soup and none of you are special." Nor am I, it's okay. And it will focus on, since we're talking about ethical acceptability, it will focus on the principles of utilitarianism, the principles of deontology, and the 4 ethical pillars of medicine. So, currently what we have, and this, like projects that I've been involved in, currently what we have is a lot of, techniques like GWAS, whole genome sequencing, next generation sequencing, that all kind of tell us all the same thing. We're all from the same primordial soup of water and chemicals. We're not all in any way special. And honestly, if everything that was special about a designer baby came out of a bottle, they would still be water and chemicals. They would still not be particularly special. Gene editing shouldn't be judged on its merits or harms because we're trying to make designer babies or not. That's not the people for whom we need to look at the bottom line of its efficacy and the bottom line of its safety and the bottom line of whether it can be used for therapy or not. So in medicine, we talk about, beneficence, the drive to do good, non-maleficence, the drive to not do harm, the drive to let patients choose and act in their own best interests, which is autonomy, and then justice, doing right by, in certain cases, the most people possible, and more directly, for your patient. So currently what we have, status quo across the board is, whether we're looking at whole genome sequencing and we're looking at the tiniest nitty-gritty details of how one gene contributes in its various, downstream effects to disease. We can look at genome-wide association and see across populations what genes give people certain risks, and basically any kind of genetic mechanisms we have for diagnosis. The issues that we come up against time and time, again, are the fact that we cannot maintain non-maleficence by just diagnosing people with a genetic disease. There are diseases like using genome-wide sequencing you can diagnose people with from birth. You can look at a single nucleotide polymorphism, one tiny letter of your DNA. We all have essentially largely functional genes, but one tiny letter in one tiny part of your DNA that could give you an 8% higher chance of having like a 3-fold increased risk of coronary artery disease. You could have increased risks for diseases that you don't have any therapies for, like inflammatory bowel disease, like things like breast cancer, for which diagnosis is so hard, for which therapy is so grueling and difficult and takes years out of people's lives. But when you have to tell someone at birth, when you have to tell someone's parents at birth that, we have sequenced this person's DNA, we know that this person is very likely to get that disease, we cannot use the current technology we have to be non-maleficent. We cannot, in good conscience, not tell people they might get that disease. But we might well ruin their lives, because for the next 80 years, a child could be like walking around and growing up and trying to build their family and not doing that, and trying to make relationships and friendships and not doing that. Because they know that in the end they will have dementia. They know that in the end they will lose it all. They know that in the end they might not remember who they are. And those are the people we want to help, and those are the people for whom, if we can use gene editing to improve their lives for even the tiniest bit, it is our moral imperative to do so in the medical profession. We cannot give people autonomy. We cannot tell people you can make free and informed choices when we give them the information, but they don't have a real choice in how to live their life. Because the scientific community, by and large, being able-bodied, being healthy, being well off, says, you have issues, they don't matter, we've told you you have a problem, live with it. And we cannot act in justice for the largest number of people. So looking from a utilitarian perspective, there were many reasons why it should be not just ethically acceptable, but an ethical imperative to allow gene sequencing. So a lot of the issues we come up against in the general field of medicine, if we do this, then disability will be eradicated. If we do this, then disabled people will lose all their supports. They will have no rights anymore. I'm a disabled person. I'm in this community. I work in it every day, and it's quite funny how those facetious arguments are generalized to something like gene sequencing and to something that's so concerned about the future not being us anymore, the future not holding to our societal diktat and not holding to the society we have right now, that we don't actually allow people with a disability to have a say in whether they would like that choice or not. And they are ultimately people who are being treated, and they are the people who deserve that choice. Sure, when we're talking about primordial soup, there are people with 3 nucleotides running and running and running and running and running through their DNA. And they get Huntington's disease, and they get ataxias, and they get diseases where they can think of worlds, they can think of whole universes around them. And they can't move, and they would like to be able to, and they can't express themselves, and they would like to be able to. And we are taking away that choice from them. The layman, without medical expertise, without having had to see what I have, like the debilitating disorders like Rett syndrome, where kids gain skills and grow and then get to 18 months and then get to, 8 years and start losing them all and then are just confined and have no future for themselves for the rest of their life. Those are the people we are giving a choice if we allow for even the scope of exploring where genetic editing can take us as a society. And those are the people for whom, from a utilitarian perspective across the world, this is an imperative for the scientific community. And then, from a deontological perspective, welfare for a person, isn't just good health. It's very easy for a lot of people here to sit there and say, our welfare is our good health. It is certainly our good fortune. But that applies to the population. For people like me who sit down every day and go, I wish that something could change. I wish that when I can't be treated with any conventional therapy, I wish that my life could change. And I know that there is a way that my life in theory can change, but those things are being held away from me by people who are by and large able-bodied, people who will never have to experience the things that I have to experience. And certainly for my friends who have harder disabilities, who have way worse, from the perspective of doing ethically right by yourself and the life you want to live and what you contribute to society. It should be everyone's right to be able to ask for the best therapy, to be able to ask for their choice in life. And it is a responsibility for society to provide it to them where possible. And that's what I think.
I call upon Chloe Kennedy to oppose the motion.
Hi everyone, it's great to be back here speaking at the College Historical Society. My name is Chloe Kennedy, for those of you that don't know me. So I'm here today to oppose the motion that this House believes it is ethically acceptable to manipulate human DNA. So a few years ago, a gene editing tool known as CRISPR, so I'm going to call it CRISPR, calculated into scientific laboratories and headlines. Fast on its heels came the re-emergence of a profoundly consequential controversy. Should these new techniques be used to engineer the traits of future children who would pass their altered genes to all generations that follow? Now, first of all, I think it is important to state that it is simply not true that gene modification is needed to allow parents to avoid passing on serious genetic disease. Other means already exist to accomplish the same goal. In the technique known as pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, for example, couples at risk of passing on a gene-related disease use in vitro fertilization to conceive several zygotes, and only those found to be free of the harmful gene are implanted and brought to term. No manipulation of genes is required. And gene manipulation is necessary only if you wish to enhance your children with genes they wouldn't be able to get from you or your partner. Like any new medical therapy, gene manipulation poses safety and ethical concerns. The very president of the American National Society of Genetic Cancers a few years ago has said that the data just isn't there to show that the manipulation of human DNA is safe or reliable. What I think this House tonight is debating is, do we risk causing a different problem, one we did not anticipate from DNA manipulation? A few years ago, a Chinese experiment showed the technique of gene manipulation could be used in human embryos, a huge scientific breakthrough. But it also caused a number of unintended, off-target effects on some parts of the genome. Basically, other genes were damaged or changed. And damage to genes is very, very serious. It can lead to cancer and other genetic complications, some of which could be fatal. Now, the Chinese experiment was not very successful in technical terms, but it did focus the world's attention. In December 2015, controversy about using gene manipulation to produce children was a key agenda item at the International Summit on Human Gene Editing. Nearly every speaker there agreed that at present, making irreversible changes to cells in the bodies of future children and all their descendants would constitute extraordinarily risky human experimentation. Just because we can change a gene does not mean we know what that change will do. Most diseases are not caused by a simple gene, but many. Changing lots of genes could have lots of effects somewhere else. By all accounts, too much is unknown about issues including off-target mutations, persisting editing effects, genetic mechanisms in embryonic and fetal development, and longer-term health and safety consequences.
Can we have a question?
Sure.
Surely, like we were talking about the effects behind genome manipulation, we're not really talking specifically about the efficacy, and we're presuming that subject to sensitive testing, the other therapy would be subject to any other medical non-genetic therapy as well. Presuming that it does pass any sort of safety testing law, any sort of federal or state requirement.
Yeah, okay. I think I get your question, yeah. Well, I'm just talking at present. Technically we can use gene modification in embryos, and just at present I believe it's not possible to do that because it can cause damage somewhere else. In future, I'm not really sure what that holds. Anyway, no, thank you. Another can of worms that we allow to be opened if we go down this route is eugenics, the racist practice of trying to improve the human race by controlling genetics and reproduction. If we do allow gene editing, there is that worry that it could lead to the creation of designer babies, whose DNA has been carefully selected to enhance their appearance, intelligence, or other traits that are not medically necessary. But then again, who are we to decide what traits should be deemed a disadvantage or not? From a policy perspective, how could one draw the distinction between a medical and an enhancement purpose for DNA modification? What constitutes a disability or a genetic deficiency? In which category would we put being short, for example? Statistics show that taller people tend to earn more money. So do people with paler skins and males. Should arranging for children with financially so do people with paler skins that are taller, so should we be making our children out to be these people? Should arranging for children with financially or socially efficient varieties of height and complexion be considered a medical intervention? Not to mention that this would most certainly increase the social and economic disparities between privileged elites and the great majority of others. No, thank you, Luke. Gene manipulation would always be expensive, and real or perceived enhancements would accrue to the offspring of the rich. Even proponents of gene modification acknowledge that such practices could lead to the emergence of social risks, so vast that any notion of a common humanity could be lost with horrific consequences. These enhancements may also be unevenly distributed among the population, leading to a society of genetic haves and have-nots. Gene modification would lead to treating children and all people like objects. It would contribute strongly to parental exceptions of pre-selecting their children's traits and to cultural construction of human beings as biological perfectible artifacts. This would change the nature of the parent-child relationship and would likely have a profound and destabilizing socio-cultural impacts. There wouldn't be the joy of bringing up a unique individual anymore, nor would there be any room for encouraging unique traits or maverick talents in any one kids anymore. This would be a world full of selfish, demanding parents who want their kids to have all the advantages of life programmed into their genes. This way, they are both dodging their own responsibility to mould the character of their offspring, as well as denying that child the right to his or her own unique life. Given that, with all these concerns at the moment, because, when we start going down this route, it is difficult to draw the line. And I think that, I just think that it's not, at the moment, it's not ethical. And it's just something that I just don't think should be allowed, because there's too many what ifs, there's too many I just don't know how to describe it. I just don't think it's ethical at the moment. I'm sorry, I have nothing else written. Bye.
I call upon Fedor Kliminov to second the motion.
As this is your first time speaking in the chamber, you have the choice to accept maiden's rights. Maiden's rights, if you accept them, mean that you will be offered no points of information from the audience. However, if you choose to waive them, we will reward you with a thunderous round of applause. What would you like to do?
I'll waive my rights. Hi, so my name is Fedor, this is my first time speaking, so not entirely sure how this is going to go, but bear with me. So the motion that we're discussing today is that gene modification in humans is ethical. But what exactly does that mean? Yes, Chloe interestingly pointed out that at the moment we don't have the technology to edit human genomes and be guaranteed of the safety. But looking back, in the 90s we had stem cell research, which was going to be the cure-all, the treatment that fixed everything. At the moment we have CRISPR-Cas. Stem cells failed, and we're not sure how CRISPR is going to go. So I don't think, as this is an ethical debate and not a scientific debate, we're not discussing what we're able to do at the moment. We're discussing whether it's hypothetically morally right or morally wrong. So what are the actual ethical problems associated with genetic modifications? So first I'd like to point out that the two major types of genetic modifications would be either somatic or germline. For somatic gene modification, that would involve taking a normal cell that has no influence on future generations, has no influence on anyone other than the individual that's subjecting themselves to the actual treatment. I don't see anything wrong with that. The main problem with genetic modification in humans is something known as known consent. It's the fact that we can't predict what will happen in the future. We can't guarantee what will happen further on. At the moment, even now with somatic gene modifications, we are able to tell the individual what the risks are, that they have a potential to develop cancers, to develop disorders. Even when used in something like, say, the enhancements of physical traits, the enhancements of height, something as simple as that, that is comparable to plastic surgery. Everyone has a right to take that risk upon themselves, and everyone has a right to that sort of treatment. So I don't see anything ethically wrong with that. The second, germline editing, point of information.
Just because they can do it, why does that ethically mean that they should be allowed to do it?
If plastic surgery is already legal and is accepted in our society, why is this any different? For germline editing, the concept is a bit trickier. And yes, we're facing these problems of what will happen in future generations and generations to come. But inherently, parents influence their children. We don't have any laws that prevent women from drinking during pregnancies. Children are still born in families with low incomes, and there's still an inherent socioeconomic divide between families, between children, between living conditions. There's no way we can safely ensure that everyone is on a level playing field, and that is just the sad reality of today's society. Yes, we are responsible for the generations that will come after us. We are responsible to leave them with a world that is livable, a world that is good. We're responsible for improving their lives. But that does not mean that we should be expected to provide absolutely everything for them. If we look at the advancements that the Industrial Revolution brought, that has led to a lot of the technologies we have today that has influenced our lives on a daily basis, and yet that has resulted in the current pollution crisis that we are in. Was that right? No, it wasn't. But our forefathers and our ancestors took that risk to change that world, and that has resulted in what we have today. So while yes, we should be cautious and we shouldn't haphazardly alter genomes and put the future generation at risk, but it is also on them to some extent to try and advance and develop the society. Next, I'd like to point out a common argument against this is the fact that we're essentially playing God, and that this is just morally wrong because this isn't what was intended. I think that's a completely null and void point. Why are we choosing to say that genetic enhancements or modifications of humans in any way is so different to, say, antibiotics or any other sort of technology, where we as humans from the start have progressed and we've developed, we've adapted the world around ourselves to suit our needs, and we've tried to overcome adversities. This is the next step. This is something that can potentially save lives, it can cure diseases. Even look at what we have achieved so far with stem cell research, with groundbreaking stem cell research in diseases such as retinitis pigmentosa, in skin regrafts, stuff like that. This is the next step in medicine. There is no reason why we should stop now. Finally, what Chloe brought up about the socioeconomic divide. Yes, that's true. I don't think there's anyone who can sit here and argue the fact that at one point there won't be, that this won't influence a gap between people. But that is to be expected. At the moment, the socioeconomic gap exists. If you take a look at privatised healthcare compared to public healthcare, compare growing up in first world countries, compare growing up to third world countries, this divide is inherently present in society. And what we must do is we should evolve and educate everyone around us to try and create an equal society. In the past 100 years, look how much we've come in areas such as homophobia, racism, sexism. We should continue to educate ourselves about that. Yes.
But it's the people with the money that are going to be able to gene edit their children. The poor people aren't going to be able to do this. So it's just going to naturally, it doesn't matter how educated you are, it's still going to cause that divide.
Not necessarily. While initially, yes, that may be true, but it's a vital part of this process to teach people that, you know, the whole thing you're saying that, like, cultural or classal divide based on some people having access to this and some people not having access to this. As the technology grows, everyone will have access to it. And until it gets to that point, it is important to try and teach and grow and learn as a society that this isn't something that is available to them, and it is important to accept the fact that some people will have access to this privilege and others won't. I'd like to conclude the speech on basically something to do with lemons. So lemons are, everyone in this room is familiar with the phrase, when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. And everyone in this room has been taught and told that that phrase means to take anything that life has to throw at you and basically get over it and overcome it. But what I'm assuming a lot of people don't know is the fact that lemons are a genetic combination of oranges and citrus fruit. At no point has life given us lemons. We've created lemons for ourselves. Why should we stop now?
And now I'd like to call Ellen Moynihan to oppose the motion.
Speaking in the chamber, you are similarly entitled to maidens' rights. Would you like to accept them or to waive them?
I'd like to waive them. So, everyone, fellow speakers, audience, I would like to ask the House to oppose the motion that the manipulation of human DNA is ethically acceptable, conscious that I am among quite a few proponents of it. Anyway, so I would like to, I intend to divide my speech into two components, namely the question of the safety of genetic engineering and then the question of its ethical soundness. So, the proposition will say that the manipulation of human DNA and the modification of their genes hold promise as a treatment for numerous single-gene disorders such as cystic fibrosis, Huntington's disease, and various other inherited disorders. While this has some element of truth to it, I can't deny it has an element of truth, there is no guarantee that genetic engineering will be the direct cure to such diseases. Moreover, how do we know for sure that altering DNA to fix one problem won't lead to another? Genetic modification may start diseases never before heard of or known. As a society, we don't know for sure what DNA manipulation may do to our health, as the human body is not accustomed to being genetically altered. Changes to the genes of eggs, sperm, and early embryos would be inherited by future generations and could alter the entire gene pool. Nobody knows what the consequences of this technique may be. Furthermore, too little is known about issues including off-target mutations, as Chloe said, which is an unintentional and dangerous edit to the genome. Modifying genes is inherently dangerous because we cannot know the ways it will affect the individual. No, thank you. So much so that the repercussions of such a technique could be potentially catastrophic. The second issue I wish to raise is that of the ethical soundness of genetic engineering. Because this process is not yet well understood, simple changes in one area of the chromosome can have unintended consequences later on. For example, the release of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs for short, into the environment has raised serious ethical concern. Once popular in the 1970s, 80s and 90s, GMOs have experienced a reversal in popularity due to a number of factors. Foremost among these factors are issues pertaining to environmental impact, economic manipulation, and a number of adverse effects on human metabolism. This in turn may lead to further illness and disease, thus undermining the initial purpose of the technique. No, thank you. Of utmost ethical concern, however, is the genetic modification of human zygotes. The whole process is fraught with philosophical issues. If wealthy parents can access correction of defective genes, what is to stop them from obtaining desirable genes as well? People may request eye colour, personality, intelligence, or pigment. This technique may very well be abused by perfectionists who want to design their babies down to the very core, instead of allowing them to form naturally into their unique individual selves. Thank you. For this reason, genetic engineering is likely to exacerbate already much too fragile subjects, such as discrimination and inequality. And in fact, I'm going to be controversial here. Maybe is this the same discrimination and inequality that existed in Hitler's Germany, where blonde hair and blue eyes were the supposed perfect appearance? Is it the same discrimination that enslaved black people in America in the 1930s because of their skin colour? Bit of respect, please. Because they did not reach the standard of what was seen as perfect. Do we really want this shallow, superficial ideology to resurface and permeate our society once again? No, thank you. Some people stand on middle ground when it comes to this issue, asking questions such as, what if gene modifications were strictly regulated and used only for the purpose of medical advancement? However, like everything else in society, it is inevitable that it would grow legs. Where am I gone? Anyway, with recent discoveries in ancestral DNA, the addition or removal of specific ethnic chromosomes has become possible. However, the technology designed to perform such an operation, as Chloe and this man here already said, would be exclusive to the top economic tiers of the developed world only. This could lead to a serious genetic rift in subsequent generations, causing deep divisions between socio-economic classes, which again raises serious ethical concern. Genetic modification is used to alter permanently what is known as the germline, or the fundamental base of the genes that are passed on to subsequent generations. This raises serious concern in the face of human reproduction, potentially depriving subsequent generations of proper vital genes and subcellular components required to carry out normal bodily functions. Could such permanent alterations be a recipe for disaster, causing potentially catastrophic consequences for the generations to come, or more seriously, bringing life as we know it to an end? Unfortunately, there's a possibility that the entire project could fall asunder, dragging all of humanity down with it. I believe that the power wielded by GNA and with genetic control of this could lead us well beyond medicine and, as Chloe said, into the realm of eugenics. And yes.
You still don't categorically explain why within the realm of medicine it isn't ethically acceptable to give your patients full autonomy to choose the right to the best life.
Interesting, yes, but my fear is that with this, development in our society, people actually may not get the right to choose for themselves, and on the contrary, it could actually go the opposite way where their lives are chosen for them. But interesting point, and for all these reasons and more, I beg the House to oppose the motion. Thank you.